So, Rob, the last time we spoke to you specifically about your coaching, your teaching English online. This time here, we're actually going to touch one of your biggest passions. Actually, it's a bugbear in your life, something that you really want to get out, and you really want to help as many people in the world out as possible. And that's on bullying, but not just bullying at school, but bullying in any kind of occasion, any kind of position. How did you get involved in this, and why is it such a big thing for you?
Okay, how I got involved, we go back to 2015, and I realized, looking at social media, looking at parents and what they were commenting on social media, that there is a major issue with bullying in our country, and let alone our country, probably the whole of the world as well. And the reason I got into this was because of the fact that it happened to me, okay? So what we're saying here is nothing has changed over decades, okay? It's still there, it remains there, nothing has changed. And I believe there's a need. So I started investigating into what was happening in specifically South Africa with bullying, and came up with a shocking revelation that in a child's lifetime, an average of 57% of our school children are bullied at some stage. Now that's absolutely massive. I mean, almost 60%. And I don't believe that it's getting any better. I only believe it's getting worse. And then I thought to myself, how can 43% bully 57%? The numbers don't correlate at all. And I realized that at the end of the day, it's, as you mentioned, who are the perpetrators? It happens to be your peers. Yes, it does. And when I say peers, it's not only your peers at school. It could be your cousins, your family, your brothers and sisters. And then what a lot of people don't like is the fact that you need to bring parents into that equation. Bullying does happen at home. I've seen bullying, and I'm sure you have, on the side of a sports field, where a poor kid is trying to play a game and is getting abuse from either a parent or from a coach or something like that. Doesn't help them to love whatever game they're playing. And then thirdly, and probably the one that where I get the most stick and have had the most questions, and why us, is teachers. Teachers bully as well. And yes, there is the other side of the equation where children are absolutely bullying teachers as well. So within our little societies, there's a massive, massive problem. And any school that says, I don't have a problem, they're pulling the wool over their own eyes, unfortunately. Somebody actually, and I will try and quote as far as possible, a teacher at one of our local schools said, we do not have a bullying problem because we zero tolerate. So my answer to that was, you cannot zero tolerate something that you know nothing about, because it's often hidden, and that's our major problem.
So, I mean, a couple of things. First thing is that I actually don't believe that's at 57%. I think it's actually higher than that. I think that's the stat that we actually hear. Because if I talk to my friends, and even friends that when they were younger, they were bullying. I mean, there's a mate of mine who, it's the biggest thing in his life now is that he actually wants to find, if he can, some of those people that he bullied when he was younger, and actually apologize to them. And there's been huge amounts of guys who's actually phoned, his contact, has actually sought out to actually apologize to those guys. But a lot of kids aren't declaring it and not saying it, or they keep it hidden. So I'm sure it's higher. And one of the ways you can see that is that if you look at how many of our sports stars now are talking out against bullying, how many international sports stars are talking out against bullying, how many programs have got going all over the world against bullying. But you do have this thing coming from the schools where, from TV or from movies, where you see that mean girl kind of, or mean boy kind of thing, where it's meant to be the big deal. Do you think a lot of it kind of stems from there, or is it started from somewhere else and that was just showing what's actually happening in schools?
I think if I go back to my school days, and it would have been last week, my 35th reunion. So we can see there's a lot of years going into that. In my time, it was happening. Okay. So that was long before television was a major market in specifically our country. I mean, we only got television in 1976, which then I was 8 years old. Hopefully people watching cannot work out the maths. And so it's been happening as long as we can remember. Just to bring in a short story, I went to my alma mater a couple of years ago, actually in 2015, and had a chat to about just over 1,000 boys. And one of my teachers, who has just retired about a year ago, he broke the record for the longest as a teacher at the school, over 40 years. He asked me the question, was I one of them? So my answer was, you can answer that question, not me. Okay, I'm not going to give you, you should know whether you were. So his guess was, and it was a correct guess, that he wasn't one of them, but then he asked about others, okay? And it came out that one of our teachers happened to be having a reputation for bullying, okay? So I said, right, here is your mistake. Why did you do nothing about it? Okay, and that reputation stemmed from initial as a teacher, went on to headmaster of 2 very big schools in South Africa with the same attitude. So yeah, I don't think it's too much of the fact that we are watching what our kids are watching and what they are seeing. I think we have to be honest and say it's been around as long as we can remember, and nothing's been done about it. That is our issue. So it's gone on for generations. I've heard people say things like, oh, you need to be a man or a woman and just get over it. Build a bridge. Oh my word. That's, I want to do things to people when they say build a bridge, because often the capability of building a bridge is not there. You don't have that capability. You're so down in the dumps. Now you must just build a bridge. It doesn't happen. So I think the big thing is that schools are apathetic, particularly the known schools, Sean, the big schools, the ones that are out in the limelight. They don't want to be seen as somebody with a problem. But they need to realize that every school, every entity where there's a lot of people for a lot of time is going to create scenarios like this. I even saw a drama class bullying each other. Okay, and you would think those people would be the most sort of out there and outgoing, but it was a simple scenario. They didn't want one girl to be in with them in something they wanted to do. And it resulted in bullying. And eventually what I did was I brought them all in. I said, okay, if you don't want her in, we'll have everybody in. There we go. But yeah, I think it's an apathy. Parents as well. Parents say, well, they don't pick it up. They don't see it. I mean, in my situation, I kept quiet. So I didn't tell my folks. So they had no idea what was going down.
Yeah, it's and I think you've actually brought up something where to actually identify. So you'll have a couple of kids. I had a geography teacher. Actually, this was a case of many of my geography teachers, funny enough, but specifically one I'm thinking of, that he used to walk into the class and just turn around to everyone and say, I don't know what you guys are going to do, but you're going to do something wrong today, and jack the entire class. Back in those days, so I'm also from the era of being beaten at school and stuff. And I mean, some of us would think it was quite funny, but later on you actually hear about quite a few kids that were too scared to go to that classroom, that hated him as a teacher, that refused to go there. And, you know, he might have done it in a bit of jest. He might have found it funny himself, but to somebody else, it's not funny. So what kind of questions can you ask yourself to see if you're not in that situation where you're bullying somebody else?
Well, I think number one, you need to ask yourself, how do you conduct yourself, whether it be in person, whether it be on social media. How are you reacting to others? Okay. If you give someone a nickname, here's a case in point. How does that person react to that nickname? And I'm not saying whether it's negative or whether it's positive. We had a scenario where a person, we gave him a very positive nickname. It happened to be, I'll tell you, the nickname was Sevi, because he was a great golfer. So the great Severiano Ballesteros, we gave him that name. And he hated it. And we only found out quite recently, and that was because he didn't want to be part of a pedestal. So it's how you you look at every situation and how do you perform when in front of other people? What do you do? Um, the big thing is to admit it. A lot of people do not admit that they are a bully until very much later, when they realize, when a lot of people come to them and say to them, listen guys, this is what you were doing, this is how bad it was. So it's very difficult. I think it's very much like any it becomes an addiction when you are doing it. And it's very much like any addiction. One needs to realize that we are wrong and needs to be able to turn that around. And I've seen that happen in schools. I've seen apologies made. The one was a school which is very challenged financially. They come from a very dark almost background, a lot of gangsters in their communities, a lot of guns. And I have to say, it was said in Afrikaans, but for the purposes of this, I'll try and recall it in English. But one of the kids said to me, the kid at the back, the big fat one, he is a bully. So then I took the next 10 minutes and I actually tried to make him realize exactly what he just said. And eventually he clicked. Okay. And he then turned around and apologized to that kid because he didn't realize that he was actually being a bully by what he said. So that's the big thing, is for people to try and realize one-liners can destroy somebody. Just one line can destroy you, let alone the physical stuff and that.
What I struggle with is that then you got your snowflake kind of kids on the other side, that anything you say to them offends them. So there must be some kind of balance where you can try and say, okay, well, sometimes you need to toughen up slightly, and sometimes you it is bullying. And how do you draw the line? Or actually, isn't there a line? You should just try and keep it friendly all along. I don't know how to put it in better words.
I think we have to, unfortunately, as human beings and as youngsters at school, you have to tolerate everybody. Basically, we need to tolerate everyone, and I know it's sometimes difficult. So when you have a child who's more susceptible and more snowflake, as you would call it, little things that affect them, then, and an adult, of course, because it's not only at schools that we're talking about, then what one needs to do is one needs to accept that everybody's different. We all have different personalities. Some are more susceptible to bullying and things getting said and physical things than others. I mean, some people say they were never bullied at school. Why? Because of the way they were able to handle it. They probably were, but they could handle it a lot better. So I think one has to look at each individual and say, you know, if you have someone around you that is hurt easily by what they are told or what they've been, what is being said to them, then you need to respect that. We need to respect each other as human beings.
In the school space, some kids don't know how to read the situation, don't know how to read other kids. So you expect the teachers or parents to assist them. In the workplace, by that stage, we're actually mature enough to be able to say, okay, well, this is this kind of person, that's that kind of person. How do you deal with it? But often it's considered a business strategy to actually dominate or to bully the person that you're working with. How do you deal with the business aspect of bullying?
I think, yeah, happened to me as well a few years ago. So experience of that too. But I think one needs to take the necessary action if it happens to you. There are grievance procedures in place in most work environments. I think if it comes down to worst is worst, one needs to go the legal route. It happened to a friend of mine quite recently, and they ended up resigning from their job because of it. And they weren't able to handle, although there was a lot of support, and that's where you need to be careful. They had a lot of support from head office, but it was the local scenario that where it was happening, and nothing was being done sufficiently from a head office point of view. So in my case, they decided to go the legal route, but unfortunately the phone call that they made happened to a very good friend of mine who is in the labor attorney industry. He's a labor attorney, and all he said to them was, if you have an issue with Rob Taylor, I'm in his corner, not yours. Put the phone down, and that was the end of that. So I was very fortunate in that respect. But you have to you have to follow as many procedures as you can within, and not be scared to do it. Um, because there is backing out there. There is, maybe not in your office, but then once you leave the office, there's a lot of support that you can get. And in this girl's case, as I said, she resigned eventually. And I think one thing we must touch on as well is lockdown and bullying, because what people believe is that we say, well, we're at home now. Guess what? We're not bullied anymore. And what happened in this friend of mine's case was, obviously we mentioned bullying at work. She started at that beginning of lockdown, she was fine. Into her second week of lockdown, she started thinking, and her thoughts went to where? To the bullying. She became angry, she became upset, she became depressed. And that struck me because I didn't think about it that way. It struck a major chord because that got her to resign. Okay. She eventually resigned while on lockdown. And then we have to look at our school children when we say to them, oh, mom's cool, dad's cool because you're at home now. This is possibly your most dangerous time because the kids are thinking. They're thinking about what's happening. They've got time. They get bored and they think about what's been going down, whether it be at school or maybe in a facility where there's a lot of kids. Maybe they'll go to they play football or they play rugby, and they start thinking, and all of a sudden the dark part comes in, and that's when you have to be careful. So we have to look at what's going on around us while we're on lockdown, see if there's depression in our children, and find out what it is. Maybe kids will get depressed because they're at home every day. They can't do what they want to do. But if it's as a result of what's been happening to them, suicides are, for those children and those adults, an answer. So we have to be very, very careful and make sure we're on top of exactly where our kids are.
And sometimes, so in one of the interviews I did previously was with a lady that deals with abuse at home and things that happen at home. And that sometimes, for people, the bullying is actually happening at home. So their escape is to go to school or go to work. And now they're stuck with that bully in 24/7 in a house. I mean, what can that person do? How can that person deal with that situation?
Well, as we know, and I think bullying would have to fall into the category of violence at times, whether it is mental or whether it is physical. So I know in our country we have contact where you can make specifically during COVID-19 for abuse in the home. But I think once COVID-19 is done and dusted, then what? Because you can still be abused, bullied at home, and then there's possibly no other than people don't like to go to childline and that type of thing. They feel embarrassed. So the best thing for me is you need to take somebody into confidence and be able to talk to someone, whether that be a family member, whether that be a friend, whether that be a teacher that you feel confident you can talk to, whether it be somebody like me that you won't know from a bar of soap, but somebody that will listen. And you can't keep these things to yourself because you're going to go down a road, and I'm not necessarily saying that suicide is the end of the road for everyone, but there's a lot of other things. There's drugs, there's alcohol, and it's often a way to find our way out of a situation. the other scenario is you need someone who can lift you, someone who can make you feel better about yourself. I think I've mentioned to you before my little strategy of DDG, which is a disease that we've all born with and we live with, and it's drop dead gorgeous. That's who we all are. And you need somebody that can build confidence. I found that. I won't say I did it all myself because I'd be lying. I eventually decided to take on the idea that I was good enough. That was the idea that I was going to do going forward. But I couldn't do it alone. Somebody had to keep on pushing me and say, remember, you are good enough. So you need someone that you can talk to. And then people say, as I'm sure you would be thinking, but I don't have anyone. Find someone. Find someone. It could be the neighbor, but find someone who you feel comfortable with allowing. And when I say comfortable, those people need to take you in confidence, and those people need to be able to get you the right help and obviously assist you with what's going down. Because as you know, a lot of the reason why we don't say anything is the circle. We don't want the circle to come back to us at the end of the day and nothing gets done.
I find it quite amazing that a lot of the, now that I'm doing a lot of self-help and I've got a lot of motivational speakers that we deal with and stuff, a lot of them actually started off being bullied. And it took them 10, 15, 20, sometimes some guys into their 40s before they actually realized that they're actually phenomenal people and they actually can do exceptionally well in life. And they've gone from nothing to something huge overnight because they've finally got their minds right. What does it take? How can a person actually sit there and look at themselves in the mirror and say, this is what I believe society thinks of me, but actually I'm not that. I'm far better than that.
It's a difficult one because everybody's going to be different. Okay. What one needs to do, first of all, is look at what you don't believe is good about you. Okay. So what do you feel is the bad thing? What do you feel is the thing that you're not confident about? In my case, it was quite simple. When I was at school, I was very small. I weighed 50 kgs in matric, so I was never going to be a man about town on a rugby field. And also having the background that I did with my dad being from very much north in the UK, I was as pale as a piece of white paper, okay? Now, let me just give you a little bit of background. What that made me was avoid things like swimming. I hated swimming. If I could go and hide away, I wouldn't swim because this skinny guy who reflected the sun into everyone else's eyes because of his paleness, and then comments would get made, and I used to hate it. And being an athlete, I would only take my tracksuit long enough to warm up, complete the race, and put them back on again. Okay, so everybody's different. So you need to look at what do you feel, or what do you think people are making you feel, because that's the bottom line. It's not about you. It's about how they are making you feel. So look at those and then look yourself in the eye, look in the mirror and say, but it's not like that. And that's basically what I did. But I was very much helped by my wife. She said to me, we're going to the beach. You can't wear tracksuit pants. It's 35 degrees. It took a while. Basically, from the age of 17, I would say, I remember the year, I was 38 years old when I wore shorts again from the age of 17. And that was because somebody was helping me. So you need to be able to see what is wrong, or what you feel is wrong, because it's not wrong. And then talk to someone about that. Do you think I'm huge and ugly and got marks all over my face? And start accepting and then seeing yourself as a beautiful person at the end of the day. But you need some help. You have to have somebody who can instill that in you all the time. It's not going to be a road that you can travel on your own.
Then things like your advertising, your media that you get out there, sometimes your perception of society want you to look in a certain way, to dress in a certain way. Is that also a form of bullying?
Um, I would say when we are contrary to that. So you can be bullied. So when society is telling you X, Y, Z, and you sort of, number one, a lot of parents today don't have the money to put their kids in the Levi jeans and all that type of thing. So I think often when you're contrary, yes, it will. You know, people say, well, look at them, they can't afford anything. But 100% correct. I think when you do follow norms and fashion trends and that type of thing, some people might even bully you because they're saying you're trying to be like X. You're trying to be like somebody else. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things in society where bullying can occur. And I mean, it's so simple. An ex-teacher of mine said to me, and I mentioned it earlier, the one-liners that I said to people, to children, you know good, you useless. And he said now he regrets those words. Certain people, it's water for duck. Others, it actually is like a dagger through their heart, and very difficult to recover from things like that.
Yeah, it's in recently in the media, you were telling me that there've been a couple of really extreme things that have happened due to bullying, and I mean things can lead up to a person committing suicide, or a person like you get in America, where these guys will walk into a shopping mall with some kind of fire weapon and start shooting people, or into a school or something. These are really,
Yeah.
really extremes of what can actually happen to somebody. I mean, what kind of stories have you heard of? You don't have to mention names or anything, but what kind of stories have you heard of recently?
Well, recently, one of our schools locally here last year, 2 suicides. Um, the one child apparently did approach the teaching body or a teacher and was basically fobbed off and said, get over it. The school has then come out and said, but it wasn't bullying. Well, what was it then? If it went to suicide, we need to prove that it wasn't a bullying scenario. I've had others a little bit lesser where I've actually been in that scenario with an individual. Okay. So, in other words, an individual child who's experiencing something at school. So, I was with the parents in a meeting. The first one was quite hectic because I mentioned to the deputy headmaster of that specific school that he had no control. That was his problem. And he was getting no support. So there was no support structure. Everything from a broken pencil to breaking someone's arm was going to the deputy headmaster, which shouldn't be the case. And the other one, we actually found this was almost an embarrassing moment for me because I found that the parent was a lot of the problem. Okay. And this we found in the meeting where we had with the teaching body, and the parent was basically bullying the teaching body. So I looked and said to them afterwards, you need to look at yourself as well. And your reaction to where teaching body is trying to solve a problem wasn't good. And you basically bullied them through what was a 3-hour meeting. That meeting could have been done in 20 minutes. And yeah, so there's some nasty ones. For the one I spoke to you earlier about, where the youngster said it's the fat guy at the back. That was, as I said, a very challenged area. They all see guns, they all see knives, they all see drugs every day of their lives. Unfortunately, they sort of took 40 people out of their school who were bullies and put them in a room and said, talk to these guys, which I feel is wrong. Because not only the bully, it is the bullied as well as the watcher. I call him the watcher or her. The people that are watching are just as responsible. And these poor kids, I looked at them and they really responded. That's the one thing that you get from an environment where they're very challenged. They respond to you. They want to give you information. They want to talk. But when I left there, I felt this sick feeling of what are they going back to? how do we solve a problem when they're going straight back into gangs? They're going straight back into drugs. The next door neighbor, even somebody in their house, is part of that. And that was a sick feeling. You know, I did in an hour what I could, but going forward, very depressing. Excuse me.
Yeah, how would people in the workplace or in a school be able to recognize the difference between bullying? You know, that somebody's been bullying or somebody's going through huge amounts of stress. What are there specific things that you can pick up, or does it change per person?
I think very similar in most cases. Okay, personality and that outgoingness will change. A lot of people will draw into their shell totally. Okay, others will be do the opposite. They'll become aggressive. Okay, so any change in what the child is doing, okay, or the adult for that matter, that will be an indication. Um, in a case of the workplace, the quality of work starts dropping. Okay, so if you're a colleague, you need to pick that up and say to them, listen, oh, wow, you're getting a little bit from the managers all the time about your work. Can I help you? What is the problem? And often then the underlying scenario comes out. At school, marks drop. If your marks drop dramatically, there's an issue. We need to, then what we normally do is we blame a teacher. We blame the child for not doing enough work, but we don't look for the underlying problem. And often, whether it's in the workplace or whether it is in a school, we need to ask the questions that are relevant. Is something happening to you? Because often they're not going to tell us. So they're going to avoid that. They might even say, yeah, it's the teacher. The teacher's no good. That's why my English is so bad, whatever. And we need to ask those questions to try and draw it out. But we always need to have bullying somewhere towards the front of our mind when we try and establish why there's a major drop. Kids stop playing sport all of a sudden. Why? We don't have to be good at sport, but we enjoyed it. Why don't we enjoy it anymore? Kids stop going to after school activities. They don't want to spend a lot of time at the school other than when they have to. Workplace as well, things come up. There's something that needs to be done with, let's say, a function. All of a sudden, your partner doesn't want to go to the function. Why? Underlying, we need to look for it. And I'm not saying it's always going to be the case that it's going to point in that direction, but we need to, at the moment, we don't have that at the forefront of our mind when asking those questions. We have it somewhere, and often we don't cover those issues. To just bring in another story, and it didn't pertain to bullying, but I had, or still have, but when he was at school, in primary school, my son was a mathematician of note. He was 100% right through primary. If he got 98, he was disappointed. And similar through high school, although, as you know, we all know as boys, there's more interest when we get into high school. We're more interested on the sporting fields. We're more interested on the skirts that might be around us when we're playing sport. So his marks were still very much A aggregate, as we would call it. And his maths was still excellent. I gave him that leeway. As you get to high school, it also gets more difficult. But then midway through grade 11, he had a 43% mark for maths. Okay. Now, how the heck can you drop to 43%? And to have a conversation was difficult. He tried to avoid it all the time. But I got a phone call from his maths teacher, and his maths teacher basically blamed him for being disruptive in the class.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And I looked at this with an open mind and said, is this my child? He's not that sort of kid. But then the next move I had to make was to try and get him to talk about it, which was a battle. Eventually, it was almost to say to him, listen, we are now driving from a water polo tournament to a friend's house for a braai. It will take me about 15 minutes. Those 15 minutes, we're talking about maths and what's going on. And he even tried to avoid it. I said, well, then it's going to take us 35 minutes or an hour because I'll just drive as slowly as I have to. And eventually it came out that he was being victimized by the teacher. And he was being bullied by the teacher in a way that the teacher was blaming him for what others were doing. And I said to him, right, you need to solve this problem. And you've got two ways of doing it. Either you do it yourself, which is preferable. Remember, you're going into grade 12. It's matric, same teacher. You've got another year to go. Or I'm going to have to do it, which obviously as a child, that was the thing. He put both hands up. He said, no, Dad, you're not walking into my school and sorting it out. So at the end of the day, about 3 weeks later, I got a phone call from him to say, Dad, do you have the math teacher's number? I said, yes, I do. So he said, can I have it, please? And I didn't think anything of it until a while later I asked him. He said, no, I needed to ask her for some extra maths. What he'd done was he'd come to her, he'd sorted it out, said, I believe that you are victimizing me. And the next term, his marks rose to 75%, and he handled it himself. But that was, I think it was more fear of what I might do if I went to the school. But he didn't realize that I'm not going to go and bully the teacher, because then I'd be sort of almost a pot calling the kettle black type scenario. So, and he managed to sort it, but a lot of kids don't, you know, and they feel very intimidated, whether teacher, whether other parents, whatever the case may be. So very difficult. And I think, Sean, the only way to resolve our problem is taking ownership of the problem. Now, at school, who must do that? I think kids need to take ownership of school. Children need to be aware. They need to help others. Anti-bullying clubs. Okay, not necessarily prefects involved. Children that have that want to help and assist well-being of others. In the workplace, you see something happening, don't step away from it. Try and assist, try and get involved. You know, everybody, we don't want to get involved in these things, but one of my lines that I would use in any talk that I do is that if in 5 years' time, if in 10 years' time, if in 30 years' time, you hear of a suicide of a colleague, of a person who was at school with you, a suicide, were you the problem? And if you didn't do anything about it, you stood and watched and you were aware, yes, you are the problem, part of the problem in a big way.
Now, one of the difficult ones is that when a kid's at school and parents try and help the kid out all the time and sort out all the issues, like something like this, when the kid goes out to the bigger world, the kid has to sort all those issues out themselves, and they can't do it. But if the parent is not hands-on, the kid will just get bullied throughout the school. It's a real difficult one to manage a situation as to how much you should get involved and how much you shouldn't get involved. Because when you get into the workplace, you can't call your 60-year-old parent to go and sort out issues at work. You know, it won't help. It actually cause half the bullying.
I think there's so many angles to look at it. If you take my scenario from what happened to me at school, okay, that put my self-esteem at less than zero probably. So what happened with me was there were opportunities work-wise which I didn't believe I was good enough to do. Okay. So I was a very happy chappy at work. I was well liked in the workplace in most cases, but it was a case of, oh, I'm not good enough for that. Okay. And people not then saying to me, but hang on, yes, you are. Yes, you are. And then the second thing is that it affects everything. It affects your relationships too. Okay. A relationship is 50-50. Don't get me wrong when I say you need to stamp your authority. Okay. Yes, we do. And I think anybody with an open mind would realize that your authority along with your partner's authority, that mix works. Okay. we need to be in a 50-50% scenario. But when you come from anything from abuse to bullying, it doesn't happen like that. You tend to be very submissive, and it's going to get you nowhere in any relationship because you will just be pushed around. It happened to me, and I don't blame the other person. In fact, I blame myself for not getting myself onto a level where I felt part of instead of just being there.
Mm.
So yeah, it can affect us in hundreds of ways. And each, I think another thing we need to look at, Sean, unfortunately, is each person is different. Each scenario is different. So if we could, and it's a heck of a task to take each individual situation is totally different to the next one. And because of the way it makes us feel, because of the way it makes us not feel. So very difficult to pinpoint, but it's about an awareness, creating an awareness, and people need to be vigilant and watching, whether it's at work, whether it's at home, whether it's at school, to alleviate when there are problems.
So, I mean, we could go on forever chatting about this, but if somebody wants to actually get you to go to their school or to go to the workplace or even to do it online, to do something like this online, how can they get hold of you and how can they chat to you?
Okay, best way would be to contact me on my email address, which is quite an easy one, rob@afm.co.za. And I have facilities like Skype and that sort of thing if people want to chat. And yeah, schools, if you'd like to come in and do a chat. This is not about remuneration at all. It's about assisting.